Make no mistake, we will fight this spill with everything we've got for as long as it takes. We will make BP pay for the damage their company has caused. And we will do whatever is necessary to help the Gulf Coast and its people recover from this tragedy.
That was President Obama in the Oval Office last night. We promised not to make a mistake. We can't promise legislative action.
And make no mistake, that speech did not go over well among Washington pundits anyway. Top Line begins right now.
Hello and welcome to ABC News Washington Post Top Line. I'm Rick Klein.
And I'm Jonathan Carl.
Every day at noon Eastern, we're right here bringing you the latest news and analysis from the world of politics, everything you need to know, and for even more, it's twitter.com/the note. John, kick us off.
Well, start off with PERP Walk. Coming off the president's speech, we saw the top executives from British Petroleum, or BP now, go to the White House. There they are, including Tony Hayward. The president finally got his face-to-face with the CEO of BP, and we're told it was a pretty tough conversation, not surprising.
A tough conversation, and the president looking to have something to unveil about this fund that he wants set up that BP would put in trust. This has been an anticipated moment. Interesting that the speech came before the meeting. He let the American people know what he was going to say. Now is the delivery, and then
this was not an exchange of views.
You don't think so?
This is how it's going to be kind of a discussion.
He is the sheriff here. Next up, cap and stuck. President Obama says he wants to have major environmental legislation, but in last night's speech, he didn't use the words climate change. He didn't use the words global warming, and the politics of this are very stark. President Obama can talk about this as a moment of national crisis, an inflection point, all he wants. That does not change the landscape in the Senate, where there just simply are not 60 votes for anything that smells like cap and trade.
Yeah, and there was a very interesting quote today from Dianne Feinstein. Yes. Senator Feinstein saying, climate change legislation is not going to stop that oil from leaking into the Gulf. Stop the leak first, and then we can talk about this legislation. And that's from Democrat Dianne Feinstein. Of course, Republicans are just crying foul, saying that the president's trying to politicize all of this. Next up, war fatigue. If there is anything that is must-pass legislation in Congress, it's funding for the troops. But Rick, let me tell you right now, they are looking at this $33 billion war funding request for Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're having a real tough time with it. You've got, on the one hand, liberals in Congress who are sick of the war, want to use that money on domestic priorities. And then you have those war supporters that don't like the way the president is talking about this timeline, particularly timeline for withdrawing troops, particularly because the war is not going very well.
Yeah, the couple of different cross currents here. One is the new concerns about spending. That's another part that's complicating the picture. And the other is the fact that this is an unpopular war and growing more unpopular. David Petraeus, we were told, conscious today, thankfully, but he's getting a lot of tough questions. Tough questions from House and Senators both. And finally, closing argument, but actually it's really an opening argument. Today, out in California, the gay marriage ban that was passed by voters in 2008 has his closing arguments in the federal court challenge. It's David Boies and Ted Olson, those old friends, who are teaming up to try to get this ban overturned. This is an issue that, regardless of what happens today, it's going to end up in the Supreme Court at some point.
Yeah, no doubt. And you can't have more legal firepower than this. You've got David Boies, fresh off the 2000, working for Gore, and Ted Olson, a hero to the right, leading the charge on this.
No, it is, and we know that this is going to be an issue for a long time to come. Well, a few minutes ago, John and I spent a couple of minutes with Senator John Thune, Republican of South Dakota. Here's some of that conversation. Senator Thune, thanks for joining us. We heard from President Obama last night in the Oval Office, and he outlined a plan to take this crisis and really move beyond that and establish a program for energy independence, for climate change. I want to ask you, did that speech change anything about the politics around this, and what do you think the prospects are for sweeping energy and climate legislation this year?
If it were done the right way, I think there'd be some support for, some energy legislation to move through Congress this year. My guess is the problem, and the president wasn't real specific in this regard about exactly what he would propose, is when the legislation starts to move on Capitol Hill, it's going to be along the lines of Kerry Lieberman, or a Waxman-Markey, which are cap-and-trade legislation, and which would impose huge energy taxes, and that's not something I don't think any Republican or very few Republicans would be for. I think anything that is that sort of top-down approach, that sort of heavy on mandates, is going to be very problematic for the president to get through. But there would be support for an energy policy that includes incentives for renewable forms of energy, and I think they could move an energy policy if they structured it the right way, but it would involve, reaching out to Republicans and trying to get something that Republicans would vote for.
Well, the other thing is it's just legislative gridlock in the Senate. I mean, you guys right now are unable to pass an extension of unemployment benefits, popular tax provisions that are expiring. I mean, what do you see happening right now? I mean, we are now 14 days in to the expiration of unemployment benefits, and there's been very little outcry compared to what we saw the last time they expired. What's going on?
I think right now what you're seeing is a growing concern, not just among Republicans have always been there, but among Democrats in both the House and the Senate about this, this increasing amount of federal debt, the amount of spending, the amount of borrowing, the deficits year over year that are being created here, and there's less and less of an appetite to do things now that are going to involve spending money that's not paid for, that's not offset. So, my view is that there are things that can get done, but there are going to have to be ways proposed to pay for it, and that's kind of the difference of opinion that we have about the legislation that's on the floor in the Senate right now. But my sense is, too, that the president has sort of reached the limits in terms of his ability to influence Democrats on Capitol Hill. I think congressional Democrats are concluding that their electoral prospects are very much in jeopardy if they continue to vote for and support spending that's not paid for and adding more and more to the federal debt.
Now, you have your own proposal for tax extenders, a proposal that would actually cut the deficit, according to your numbers. Some groups have looked at this, including some liberal groups, and said this would mandate really a government shutdown by the end of the year. Do you agree with that analysis? Are you concerned about what it would mean to actually do these cuts at the same time you're extending the tax benefits?
No, I think what they're doing is they're confusing budget authority and outlays, and that's a very different thing. What my amendment would do, it would reduce spending this year, and when I say spending, outlays by about 2%, but that's manageable. I don't think any federal agency couldn't come up with a way in which to shave a 2% out of their budget this year. A lot of the reductions in spending would occur in out years in budget authority, and of course there's an opportunity to plan for that. So I think that's what we're operating on, is what the Congressional Budget Office is saying, and that's what the CBO is saying. And so some of these groups that are coming up with these various analyses, I think, are not consistent with certainly what the CBO is saying, and I think also confusing budget authority and outlays.
Now, we also have the big war supplemental, $33 billion for Afghanistan, Iraq. It also seems to be facing some real opposition from the Democrats. Will you and will the Republicans stand with the president to get that war supplemental passed?
We will, if the president would focus it, and if the Democrats here in Congress would focus it really on the emergency funding for Iraq and Afghanistan. I think that the problem, again, is all the other things that get added on to these war supplementals, and the fact that it's not paid for. Republicans are increasingly, I think, dug in on the issue of making sure that new spending is offset, or at least try to offset.
Excuse me, Senator, does that include the war funding? I mean, will you insist that every penny of that money for Afghanistan is offset by cuts elsewhere?
I don't think that that's necessarily a consensus position even among Republicans. Republicans in the past have viewed Iraq and Afghanistan and the war effort as something that truly is an emergency, although it's hard to say now that we don't know what these costs are going to be.
Yeah, 9 years in, right.
Frankly, I think that there is even a growing consensus among Republicans that we need to start budgeting for this, we need to start figuring out how to pay for it, and I think that's kind of the majority view among Republicans now, but I wouldn't say it's a unanimous view. I think that the question of whether or not you have to pay for the Iraq and Afghanistan funding component of that overall supplemental bill that passed in the Senate that's an open question.
So you do want to see offsets, though?
We particularly want to offset everything that's not war funding, but there are people, we've got a lot of Republicans who believe that even the war funding now ought to be offset and ought to be budgeted for.
Okay, two quick questions on politics before we let you go. Where are we on the Thune 2012 talk?
Well, at the moment we aren't anywhere on that, but
nowhere.
We are focused on 2010. Haven't you guys heard?
We heard you've got a real squeaker. But fair to say, if you were to become president, that you do your first Oval Office address in less than 18 months into your term?
Well, I think that waiting this long, and it took a crisis to do that, the president, I think right now is feeling a lot of pressure, obviously politically, and his people thought they needed to get him out there, get him in front of the American public on this, but it probably should have happened a lot earlier.
Okay, we're out of time. Republicans have a chance of beating Herseth out there, that House race in South Dakota?
I think it's going to be a very competitive race. She's going to is going to be a competitive campaign. There's a great Republican nominee out there, and for the first time, I think in a long time in South Dakota, you're going to have a House race to watch, and maybe not a Senate race.
No, maybe not. Your preference on that one, Senator John Thune, Republican of South Dakota. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Rick.